eucalyptus citriodora. Beautiful trees here in front of the Catholic Mission, San Luis Obispo, California.
I'm the former city arborist, and I think I went over, the title was Urban Forest Supervisor, so we supervise the tree crew, the contract, when we go outside for contractors. Then I did development review for development projects, tree protection plans. In fact, looked at a couple of Jeremy's tree protection plans, and they were really good, mostly. So anyway, back to my title, Urban Forest Supervisor / City Arborist. For your write-ups, you can just say former city arborist. And so, as the former city arborist, we did a lot of controversial things, so I'll just start out with that. And the first one, there used to be an extra large Cebia speciosa, I think that one, the floss silk tree. They get beautiful blooms on them. They have those prickles, those thorns on the outside of the bark there. It's kind of a unique tree.
Floss silk tree. This is the 2024 Urban Forestry class.
It hit the city's designated heritage tree list, and it would canopy out maybe about halfway down these steps from there. And they had it pruned back from the church, but the branches were out, and it was over the top of the cross up there as far as the width and height of the canopy. So it was a massive tree, but it was starting to mess up the steps and blowing out that wall right there. In fact, it still hasn't gone all the way back. And that tree was removed probably 15 years ago, if you remember. My dates are going to be a little vague, so. But when they applied to so another part of my job as a city arborist is we had tree removal applications, and they still do, for trees over a certain diameter. If it was a native over 10 inches in diameter, even on private property, you have to get a permit to remove it, and go through a process. And then if you do get approval, there's replanting requirements. If it's a non-native, which those are non-native, those floss silk trees, it's anything over 20 inches in diameter. And this one was well over 20 inches in diameter. It was probably from me to this gentleman here in diameter. And so you can imagine the massive muscular root system on that thing, just pushing out, going in all compass directions, trying to find, roots go where conditions are favorable. So this one went to tree committee, it got denied. A couple of years went by, went back to tree committee, it got denied, so then they appealed it to city council. So fortunately or unfortunately, occasionally there are big leaders of the church that are on city council as well. So this one went to city council, and there became a kind of a public outcry to save the tree. Well, sometimes people can't see the forest for the tree, so they focus on one tree instead of improving the overall urban forest. There was people with, they put signs on it, save the tree, and things like that. And then the church was very adamant, because at that point, on the second time around, it had gotten into the old adobe. So the church was originally built with clay adobe, then they put that outside coating on it. But this corner right here, just beyond about maybe 4 inches of brick and other hard materials, is the old adobe of the church. And the roots had gotten in there, and they were blowing out the old adobe bricks and stuff like that. So that's one of the main reasons that it ended up getting approval. If the tree was just causing maintenance issues and it wasn't blowing up all the infrastructure, the tree committee, and even if they took it to city council, it probably would have been denied. Part of the requirement was to replant. So that's what you're looking at down there, is the tree that was replanted after this controversial tree was removed. So we had this deodar cedar tree here, and there was a guy named Josh who was a forestry major that was working part-time on our crew. He did most of the digging. If you guys ever seen a 48-inch box, it's 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. And so that was quite a big dig. He had some help, but he did most of the work. A good kid. Now he works for Bartlett Tree Experts out of the Bay Area. Big tree company. Some people have called them California Christmas trees. But when they grow, we got a big 48-inch box, craned it in, and we were going to keep it pruned and down. But if you've ever seen the city emblem, and in fact, I don't have one on here, but the city emblem, the picture was taken from down there at the church, and it's got this Mission and Mission Plaza, and you'll see it on it's just like the city brand, the city logo.
Huh.
And so the church was super worried after we spent all that money and time putting that. We thought, well, we'll just trim that tree every year, you know, just a real light, almost like a hedge trim to keep it and keep it small. So the church read that species gets 70 feet or whatever it is, 70, 80 feet around here. And so they thought it was going to grow up and block the iconic view from Choro. So there was another controversial thing where the church ended up winning and it went to city council and everything, and I had to suffer some grief for that one because it was going to block the iconic view. So in hindsight, we should have checked in with the church and said, if we plant this Christmas tree here, is that going to affect you in any way? And it did. And after we realized, you know, the concern that the church had, so we ended up transplanting it back out over to Laguna Lake Park. But so just in this short area, we've had some pretty controversial things that ended up going to city council for a ruling. All right, so that tree right there, when it was in the press, they were calling it a couple different names. They were calling it Flossie, like making a nickname like Nessie. It was kind of like that. They had the public had nicknamed it, and in the paper they were calling it Flossie because of floss silk tree, and even Bressie because of the Bressie family. So it was I think once people realized what was going on with the infrastructure in the church, it kind of helped people go, okay. And plus they said they would spend money and plant another tree. And so this is the tree down here. Let's go down here and take a look at it. A lot of times trees adapt to situations, and trees move, they just move very slowly. That's a line from Lord of the Rings. But trees do move. The wind blows, and if the wind's blowing this way, they start to send roots out appropriately, like to strengthen their base. So one of the reasons you see trees planted between two stakes with those little loose rubber ties is so that it can move and strengthen up, but not fall all the way over in the wind. So you get them from the nursery, they grow them up on a stake like a vine. They cut all the laterals, force feed them too much fertilizer, they grow really fast, and they get up to the top of the stake, and then they let the branches start to come out, and then they sell it to you. Well, that's a tall, skinny, you take them off that nursery stake and they can't even hardly stand up. Most of them flop over. So put them between two stakes, they learn to get strong in the wind. So they do move. This was a 24-inch box when they planted it. And it was probably that big in diameter, 4 inches in diameter, and maybe my height, maybe a little taller.
It's doing
so
good.
In just 15 or so years, this thing has really grown. When you guys come back to visit San Luis, and I went to school there, and they'll see this tree and go, wow, that thing really grew. I think it's Cebia speciosa. This was a big ficus tree. It used to canopy out over the seeding, and these things drop a lot of debris. The ficus do, so do olives. But this is a fruitless olive that sometimes gets a couple olives on it.
Is there such thing as a truly fruitless olive?
Not that I've seen.
Yeah.
They say there are, but everyone that's been planted in my 30, 40 years of observing trees seems to put on some fruit occasionally, not that much, not like some varieties that just drop copious amounts of olives on the sidewalk and it stains it. It's really bad. I wouldn't recommend an olive near any kind of hardscape infrastructure. So the point of this tree was there was a couple of forestry majors that were on the logging team, and they had a little too much fun down here in downtown San Luis. They started at the top and hit all the bars on the way down. And so they were feeling pretty good by the time they got to Spikes, which is just kind of like at the edge of town, edge of the downtown. And so they walked out and walked down a little further, and there was a young tree, you know, maybe 4 inches in diameter, and they decided to break some limbs off of it. So they were feeling, you know, alcohol, testosterone, whatever, broke the limbs off, and there was a cop sitting right there watching them. So they got busted, they got in trouble with the school, they got, their parents were notified, all that stuff. And part of their thing was they had to work with the tree crew like community service. They had so many hours they had to do. Well, one morning we got a call in the yard that this ficus tree had a failure, and most of the top had broke out. They same thing what happens at the nursery, and we're trying to cure that, is bad nursery practices. And we'll get into that in another class. But basically they used to grow especially trees up to the top of the stake, cutting all the lower laterals off, and then they would tip the top. And when they tip the top, that stimulates multiple branches to shoot, and then all the branches come out in the same spot. And when they come out in the same spot, all the stress is right there in the crotch, the main crotches. And those branches grow up and they push against each other, and sometimes this thing had a catastrophic failure. So we had to remove this tree. We had those 2 students with us. They ended up being pretty good guys, hard workers. One guy was raised on a ranch, the other guy they were both into forestry, hardcore forestry guys. And it was their last year, and they did some really good work. So we would cut the stuff with the trucks and everything, and we had them drag the big heavy branches to the chipper, and they ended up being a lot of help in the time that they were here.
Quick question for you. That material at the base of the tree right there, what is that? What are they using now to surround these trees with?
Well, we've done a lot of experiments down here, and this actually occurred after I left. But this is a rubberized, like ground up tires and stuff mixed with some kind of slurry to hold it together. And what happens is these roots expand and they start lifting up the tree wells. And this, in olives, usually have a nice buttress root. This stuff is flexible, so when these go like this, it doesn't crack. And it's pretty easy to take like a digging bar and expand it. As opposed to, you'll see different configurations of tree wells. Anyway, so yeah, that's what this is. To try to avoid people tripping and stuff like that. So let's go down about to where that truck is right there. Some fun stories about these trees right here. We used to have to come in pretty early, like 6, and get our delineation and try to trim these trees before too much traffic would come into the downtown. There was one year, and it was that tree in the middle there, that I had walked out a limb and done some trimming, and I was on my way back, and I was tightening up my rope. And I was on the tree crew for about the first 15 years. I worked for the city of Thousand Oaks on their tree crew for 6. And then I worked, then I got the job here in San Luis, but the last 18 years I was a city arborist. But I was on the crew, walking out that limb right there, and I missed what we call a sucker, which is an upright shoot that was crossing up into some other branches. And so my rope was tight. I leaned out and I went to get that sucker, and I pulled the saw through. You can see the scar right there.
Ooh.
And so I had to get 8 stitches. And in the old days, tough guys or whatever, and that was about 10 o'clock in the morning, went down, got the stitches, got patched up.
Put duct tape on it.
We had lunch, and then ended up going back to work that afternoon. Another story, and this has something to do with the class, always look at all of your options when you're trying to diagnose tree diseases or what's killing a tree. So that tree in front of Bulls, over the course of a couple of years, was starting to decline. It started to get dead branches. It was looking really peaked. So the next year we come back, same thing. It's looking terrible. We can't diagnose it. We're a bunch of arborists, and talk to my friends at Cal Poly, and they look at it. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with that tree. So the crew called me one day and asked me to come down and talk to this guy. So what was happening is they witnessed him come out, the morning janitor, with his pine sol or whatever it was, and he was dumping it in the tree well. And so that's abiotic disorder. So there's a difference between biotic and abiotic. Biotic is, you know, something biological that happened, an insect, is a disease or something. Abiotic is something maybe a human did it with a backhoe or didn't water enough or something like that. So that was definitely abiotic. So I talked to him, I said, yeah, can you please not dump that down in the tree well? And he's like, oh, okay. He just didn't know. He just, you know, he didn't know he was hurting that tree. So that's just an example of always look at all your different options when you're diagnosing.
What's the weepy, sappy stuff coming out of that big branch right there?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought maybe it was mechanical injury or just moisture from the foggy morning.
I think it's slime flux.
But it looks like slime flux or something like that.
Yeah.
But diagnosis without study is malpractice. So
Yeah.
we'd have to take a sample of that and check it out. I've seen that before on these. It doesn't seem to kill them. Take the California live oak, for example. They get a myriad, and some people call them red oak, Quercus agrifolia. They get a myriad of diseases and insects and stuff, and they just keep on living. Sometimes the oak moth will partially or fully defoliate them. They come out of it. They'll get some kind of borer. They seem to come out of it. They definitely get insects and like sucking insects like aphids and stuff that suck the sugar out, and they just keep on living. I'm already losing my voice, Jared. So we try to place pruning cuts in the right place for maximum wound closure, because even a pruning cut is a wound. It'll allow decay into the tree. So that big branch right there used to come way out over here, and it partially failed. It broke about halfway, and it was laying on the light standers. A huge wound takes forever to heal, right? A small wound, one season that heals over, that protective skin, the bark, and live tissue won't allow oxygen and water in, and so it slows or stops any decay that's starting to form. A large wound like that, even though it was a pruning cut, you can see how dark. Ficus wood is white. It's very white in color. You can see it's already starting to discolor and getting a little bit of decay forming down in there. And what kills a lot of old trees is an accumulation of decay, whether it's from mechanical injury, squirrels eating around on the root system causes a little bit of decay, a branch breaks off in a storm, that branch, the rest of the branch dies, and dead wood is food for the fungus. It will help enter that fungus into the tree, start rotting the tree out. And so all these little accumulation of decay over the years start to rot that tree out, and they start to lose structural integrity, and they break and fall over. You want to make the pruning cut in the right place, and we'll go over some of those details in another class. But for now, you can see that those big, what they call wound closure wood is starting to form around that. It's going to take several more years before that wood actually grows, that new wood actually seals that over. See that young tree right there past that gentleman? There was a lady that dove out of that window, that upstairs window, several years ago. And we had just put a tree in about that size with a tree protection system. And so she dove out of that window, apparently trying to commit suicide. And she ended up landing in that tree, and that tree kind of softened her land, and then she ended up into the street. But when the police came there, and they were telling us, because they said broken tree, and we came down, oh, okay. There was caution tape and police everywhere. They had already carted her off to the hospital. But they said if it wasn't for that small tree, she would have died.
Wow. Tree saved her life?
So for a while there, we were saying that urban forestry saves lives.
Yeah, can I give the backstory real quick?
Sure.
This tree right here in front of Eureka Burger, the owner of Eureka Burger, He owns a lot of property here in San Luis Obispo. He's concerned about this tree. If you look up on the left side of this tree, it's been hit by a lot of trucks. So you see all the damage on that trunk right up there. So it's got a little bit of a lean into the street. And when trash trucks go by and other trucks, they keep clipping that. So it's been a kind of a liability issue. It's also cracking the sidewalk pretty bad over here. And it's close to the building, so they're concerned about the cracking sidewalk, possibly cracking foundation. And we'll walk around the corner and there's another big ficus tree over there that you can see has lifted the sidewalk a couple inches. So I just wanted to show Ron and ask him a couple questions.
This looks fresh.
As you guys can see, these ficus trees are super important to the downtown, right? So if you imagine this downtown without these ficus trees, it would look like Fresno or something. No offense, but it would look pretty bad. But San Luis, really, the reason San Luis is so cool, the downtown, probably you could say is probably because of the trees. So Ron had a lot to do with that, by the way. But these trees have always been a problem because they're super fast growing. So the roots and the buttress roots and the roots are pushing up sidewalks all the time. And so over here next to the building, you can see it's lifted like 2 or 3 inches. And so they're concerned about their building, right? So if you own this building, this is a multi-million-dollar building, right? And if this tree starts cracking the foundation, then it's going to be super expensive. So I was hired by the property owner to come and assess the damage and write up a report what it's doing to the sidewalk, to possibly to the foundation, so that he has a baseline, basically if there's ever some sort of legal dispute, because he wants to remove these 2 trees. But you know, it's such a big issue, like where, at what point do you protect somebody's private property, you know, and remove a tree, or do you protect the tree and let the building suffer for it on behalf of the public? Right? So it's a big philosophical decision, really. So that's a challenging one. So the question to Ron is, at what point would the city say, okay, this has become a liability to the point to where we need to allow them to remove the tree, rather, you know, and protect the private property owners' rights and their property.
And
yeah.
So that one is subjective. There's a lot of factors involved. If they have a structural report on the foundation, that weighs pretty heavy. Visibly, you can see what's going on, but the city will, every so often, it looks like, I don't know, I think they've looks like they're about ready to do some work here because of the markings. They're marking gas lines and different things. So the big ficus trees downtown, I liken them to giant bonsais, because we're always cutting the tops, cutting them back from the building, cutting them up from the street, thinning them out, reducing the overall photosynthetic ability of that tree. So the trees are, the leaves of the tree produce the energy that comes in. So think of them as solar panels. You got a factory, which is the trunk and the roots and the rest of the tree, but the leaves are the solar panels that power that. So you cut the leaves off, you got less power, you got less growth. You cut the roots, you reduce that tree's ability to absorb water and nutrients. So I call them giant bonsais. And these things would, this thing's probably 20, 25 years old. There was one of those carrot woods, Campaniopsis anacardiotes, that was planted here, and it failed during a storm or something like that. So we had to replace it, and it was replaced with the ficus. So this is a relatively young tree. Okay, look at all the damage it's doing already. So roots go where conditions are favorable. Get back to your story. It depends. Do they have any records of any damage? That also weighs in. And does the city have any future projects of maybe bulbing out for outdoor seating? That could weigh in. There's a whole bunch of things that would weigh in.
So maybe the class could benefit from this too. Typically what happens is a homeowner or a property owner has an arborist write up a report, and then they go they fill out a tree removal application at the city, right, or the county or wherever the tree's located, and then they'll have the city arborist, somebody like Ron, come and check it out to verify, you know, the damage that's being done. If it's a hazard, maybe it's a tripping hazard. You know, people will sue for whatever nowadays. So sometimes if it's a tripping hazard, you know, like this corner back here, they had to fill that in, obviously, with some asphalt, which is kind of a goofy filler. But they fill that in all the time, because if somebody trips over that, or somebody wrecks on their skateboard or whatever, and maybe they, you know, bash their face on the corner of that pot or something, then that's a big liability. You know, people are going to want to get refunded for their facial plastic surgery or whatever it might be.
And any records like that, especially if it's tangible, if you have a report from the structural engineer that says it's compromising, it's displacing the floor by 3/4 of an inch or whatever, and they can show that it's actually the tree and not settling and stuff like that.
So it's usually not till it does damage to the foundation, I believe, before the city council will get involved, and they'll get engineering reports done also to prove that the tree roots are damaging the foundation of the building, and it just kind of goes up the ladder until finally they get this tree removed. But it's a process.
It is. So it would probably go to tree committee. Committee would probably initially deny it, and then it would go to city council. The big major ones, a little tree in a backyard, tree committee has pretty good abilities to approve those. A tree like this, they would more than likely send it to tree committee. It's a new process now. The applicant has to apply to city council and appeal the tree committee's decision. So you want to remove this tree, there's a couple layers to get through.
Yeah.
And it can take a little time and a little effort.
I think he had a question. You guys have any questions?
If like ficus is such a fast-growing tree, why was ficus planted in this
We're
spot?
kind of when I was there, we were phasing them out. When one was removed or needed, we got a lot of pushback from Cal Poly and other folks around town, because they like that look of the big ficus downtown. So it used to be like 80%. If you look at the city's list, the requirement was, say you built in an area where there wasn't trees, and you had to put trees in as part of your development requirements. You had to put street trees in. 10, 12, 15 years ago maybe, the list was it had to be 80% ficus, and then there was a few other species that they could plant in the downtown. Now it's like 10% ficus. So they're not getting rid of the ficus completely, but they're kind of phasing them out. So they kind of had made a compromise with concerned folks, because San Luis has a lot of committees and a lot of different opinions, and they try to work with everybody's opinion. They don't just say, no, we're removing all the ficus tomorrow. If we did that, downtown would look naked. It would totally look different. It would change the ambiance and the feel of the downtown.
The new word's vibe, Ron. It's vibe.
Vibe, okay.
Change the vibe, yeah.
Well, I like ambiance. It would, and then we plant other little trees. Well, those trees are small, right? And they wouldn't have much of an impact till several years down the road.
Any other questions?
Did that answer your question? I went on a tangent.
Thanks, yeah.
You ready?
Ready.
Let's walk.
What's going on there, Ron? It's a lot of hardware. Wow, that is crazy.
You guys see the lights and all this stuff? It's kind of an example. So, does anybody know what the biggest difference between forestry and urban forestry is? Cities? Well, you'll figure it out. It's people. In the forest, there's not many people. And so when people come to infrastructure, ideas, what to do with the tree, you take a group of 50 people and ask them questions on what we should do and this and that, and you'll probably get 40 different answers. But this particular tree has a lot of stuff, so I'm pointing it out. It has a plaque in memory of somebody. You can see they've been expanding the tree well to help with the trip and falls that happen on roots. This one's got Christmas lights in it. It's just impacted by the urban setting. and it's still hanging in there. These ficus are tough. They can take heavy root pruning, they can take heavy top pruning, and so this is one of the older, bigger ones, probably 40, 50 years. At some point, it will have to be replaced. And so they're gonna probably replace it with maybe a jacaranda, maybe whatever species they have determined. So the biggest difference between forestry and urban forestry are people and all their ideas and all the infrastructure, curbs, gutters, sidewalk, signs, buildings, you name it, anything man-made sort of, it impacts the trees. It's hard to get trees to grow in an urban environment. There's not many trees that do well in an urban environment. They don't get watered. I mean, they get watered initially when they're planted and maybe for the first few years. And then after that, they're sort of just on their own. So the ficus are good in that respect. But as far as damage to the infrastructure and all the trimming and maintenance, they're a little more costly. But you get a quicker urban forest with a tree like a ficus. But they're being phased out, or at least dramatically reduced in the downtown. All right, so this is a good example of when the tree committee and arborists, myself and others, convinced a property owner that these trees were actually a benefit to him. If these trees weren't here and it was afternoon, the sun would be beaming in here, hot afternoon. It wouldn't be as pleasant in here. Now he's all for the urban forest. He's real happy about the urban forest because he got educated and he understands. So education is the key to a successful urban forest. Educating the public. We did a lot of outreach, Arbor Day, educating the public and educating groups about the benefits of the urban forest and why it's important to fund it. The green infrastructure is the only type of infrastructure that doesn't start devaluating as soon as it is installed. In fact, the green infrastructure increases in value. Big Jeremy Bean, Jerry Davis, one year during the 90s, we had to go walk through there. So a good crown reduction can be beneficial. Heavy topping is a bad no-no. Redwoods don't do very good in San Luis Obispo. We're too far south and we're too far inland, and that's too dry here. But in some settings, in some occasions, like near the creek, and these trees are protected by buildings, other trees, and the elevation that they sit at, they're not going to catch as much of the drying winds, and there's plenty of moisture here between the creek and the irrigated landscapes. So these are pretty big trees for San Luis, and they typically don't get this tall in a different. A lot of trees in San Luis, you'll see they grow up pretty good the first few years, and then the top starts to fry back, and then you get this kind of flagging looking on the leeward side. The branches kind of bend over and dry up and die, and then a new lead will shoot up and it'll do the same thing, and it just gets kind of ugly and gnarly up there.
Dry
the
summer
trunk
wind.
keeps getting bigger in diameter. The lower branches look good.
Yeah.
But it's just dry. It just can't get enough water up there to keep itself saturated to for evaporative cooling and all that stuff. Somebody will get a live Christmas tree and plant it in their backyard about 4 feet away from their patio. 10, 15, 20 years down the road, they're at tree committee wanting to remove it because now the root system has gotten so big and gnarly, it's cracking up their patio and causing trouble with their property. So you plant the right tree in the right place, it can stay there for a long time and do that carbon sequestration, do all the benefits of the reason we plant trees. You plant the wrong trees in the wrong place, you're doing a lot of maintenance, and then that tree has to come out at some time. So for your long-term investment, do research and then plant the right tree in the right place. PG&E's biggest thing is they don't want tall trees underneath their wires, because then they have to come in and cut them. But that same motto goes true with anything. Don't plant it too close to the house, don't plant it too close to the walkway, the sidewalk. different infrastructure like that.
Is there a good rule of thumb how far you should plant a tree from any hardscapes or
There is
utilities?
no set rule of thumb, but in general, the bigger the tree species, the faster growing, the further away you'd want it to be. Say take a crepe myrtle, you'd probably want 4 or 5 feet from your walkways. You put a poplar in that same spot, in just about 5 or 6 years, it's probably going to be lifting the sidewalk. So big fast growing trees have big fast growing roots. Trees don't go out perfectly in all compass directions unless the soil is perfect in all compass directions, and that's rare, especially in urban settings. So this is a native walnut tree, the black walnut. You can see why they call them black walnut. The wood on these are absolutely beautiful. You get big old ones. They make tables and different things. It's got almost this iridescent look to it. It's darker colors, and the new wood is lighter in color. When this place was remodeled and built, they wanted to have outdoor seating out here, and so this tree was in their way. They're like, we want to remove this tree. Well, the guy you met this morning, Freddie Audie is his name, and myself, we fought against it. It's a native tree. It provides stuff for the critters, and so this actually cantilevers out over the creek. Their property ends about right here, but they were able to utilize this space because they preserved this tree and did some other things. So then they built this out, and if you can look under here, which you can't, but take my word for it, they didn't build a hard retaining wall right here. It's on piers. And so the difference on that is, if you can imagine a pizza, and that's the root system, right? Because mostly they're pretty close to the surface. They go out laterally more than they go deep. And that all also has to do with soil and conditions. When you put a pier in, you're only damaging this much of the root system. If you put a hard wall right there, you're cutting about probably 40% of the roots that are going out. So you're taking almost half that pizza away. And that pizza is the root system that absorbs water and nutrients. I'm probably making you hungry, huh? Water and nutrients for the tree. This is a nice setting as well. And they put tables out here and stuff. I don't know if you guys have been down here at night, and they light up all these lights, and they got people sitting over there and people out here and people inside. It's a hopping place. So that's an example of somebody wanting to do something and not getting their way, but there was a compromise made where that tree can stay, and you can also have your outdoor seating.
It worked out.
It worked out.
Beautiful.
There used to be a giant Monterey pine tree right where that bush is, past that sign. I mean, it was super tall, way taller than this one. Pretty tall for a Monterey pine, but most of the lower branches had died off due to shading, and it had a big heavy top head, and it was kind of leaning over this direction. So it had a leeward lean, because the prevailing winds generally come this direction. So it was kind of leaning over this way. So my buddy Darren Kersey, when I was a young guy on the tree crew, he predicted, he goes, that tree's gonna fall over. He's looking at the root system. It had a lot of roots up on the surface. Compacted clay soils tend to not let roots go very deep. So the roots were way up on the surface, and sure enough, about 2 years later, during a storm, that thing fell. It damaged this bridge. It broke this sycamore tree here. This is a stump sprout that we cut the other sprouts off and trained one up. So this one has a big root system compared to its size, but this is regrowth from that. It damaged the bridge, and if you can kind of see that hole in this tree, see how there's 2 branches that go up like that? It kind of fell in there and did some damage to that tree. So we had to go up there and prune that tree. And I guess Jeremy was saying that he had the contract trimming that tree, because that's a private tree. That's over on the private property. But because it was a city tree that damaged it, we just went ahead and pruned out the damaged limb. It was about maybe, if you pruned it, Jeremy, saw it was going out that way into that hole right there.
That happened before me when the pine hit it.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
I want to say 25 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that sprout's 25
I
years.
was still in school.
And it looks small up here, but you look down at the base, it's pretty good size. And so we had to get a big crane. Bragg brought their big crane out there on the street, and we craned that pine, parts of it, at a, little at a time.
Can I add a little something?
Sure.
If you guys don't know, that's Novu Restaurant. It's probably the most popular, one of the best restaurants in the county, and super nice place, good spot to get good food. But the oak tree right there creates the ambiance of that whole patio. So they hang lights in it. It's super valuable. So if you compare the values of different trees, some of these trees in the creek or whatever, they add a little bit. But if that oak tree were gone, that restaurant would probably go under. So when you think about trees and their values and the environment they're creating, this is a good example of one. I think in your class you guys are going to learn how to value trees also, like especially for insurance cases or whatever. If somebody kills a tree, you'll learn how to put a value on a tree. So this one here would get a super high value. Imagine trying to replace that. It's impossible to do. So if somebody vandalized that tree, killed it, or if a tree hit it like he's talking about, or it broke, then it would just, it'd be a major economic impact also. So they maintain it. They have it pruned like every 2 to 3 years.
So I have a question for you, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Who pruned it last time?
I don't know, but they were pretty heavy.
Yeah, it's a little much.
Yeah.
And it looks like they left a big stub over here on the right.
Yeah.
So,
yep. It probably
anyway,
holds their lights or something.
We're not going to critique other companies, but some companies, and sometimes it's hard. You have the clients saying, I want you to take more, I want you to take more. So they kind of give into it. But generally a tree like that, an older oak, you'd only want to take about 10 to 20% off.
Still recovering.
It's a little sparse.
It was crazy pruning this tree too, because we had to get the city's permission. We had to be here before clients showed up at 11 o'clock. So we had to have a guy on each side of that tree pruning it, 2 guys down in the creek dragging branches out of the creek, and we had to carry it all the way up here across the lawn and into the parking lot to a chipper way over there. So it was quite the circus trying to get this thing pruned and done and cleaned up before 11 o'clock. So it's a big tree. It's a lot of work.
Yep. So you guys might want to take a picture of this to help you with your write-up. So we call this the moon tree. Any idea why it's the moon tree without reading that? NASA allowed an experiment because seed is very light. They took seed from about 10 or 15 different species of plants, and redwoods were one of them. They took them to the moon and back to see if it changed the germination rate of that seed. So they had tomatoes and they had mostly vegetable crops, but they had a few species of trees. And it was a good experiment, but they didn't find anything. There was no change in germination rates. So space travel doesn't change germination rates. Why is that important? I don't know, maybe we might go to Mars someday. We're gonna bring some seed with us, get there and it's no good. But common sense would tell you that it probably wouldn't change the germination rate because it's just weightlessness, right? And they're in their little packets and all that stuff. I could see if there was like extreme changes in temperature or something of that nature, it might change the germination rate. This is pretty cool. There was like 14, and it was a tiny thing, about this big, in a little cylindrical planting tube. And this thing has grown quite a bit. It's pretty good size.
So you were here at that time?
No, this was planted before I got here.
Okay.
It was smaller than that, but it was decent size. But Jack Brazil, the arborist before Todd Martin, he was telling me. He was here when that was planted.
Wow.
It took it a while to get going, but once it got going, it did pretty good. Partially because it gets a lot of water from this turf irrigation. They water and fertilize and renovate this thing all the time. So this thing's, you know, sucked over there. So if we could see into the ground, I would imagine that the majority of the roots on this tree are out over there, and the majority of feeder roots are probably out over there. Now it may have some down to the creek, and you'd be surprised how far roots can go. Dr. Alex Shigo did a study on our California, what some people call valley oaks. The guys in North County, San Luis Obispo, call them white oaks, but it's the Quercus lobata. It's the ones with the lobed leaves. Where the trees were sitting, there was like a little draw where water would accumulate a little bit during the wet season. And they traced the roots from those trees down that draw, and it was dry at the time. They figured out that those trees can send their roots out 4 to 5 times the diameter of their drip line. And the drip line on those old oaks is pretty extensive. So you take that 4 to 5 times. So in theory, a tree this big in diameter could easily have roots all the way to those vehicles over there, and maybe even beyond, if conditions are favorable. So roots go where conditions are favorable. Yes, Jeremy?
So how old do you think it is? Does it say in here what year it was planted?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
I would say in the 70s it was planted. When it was germinated, well, it had to be probably germinated late 60s, early 70s, when the Apollos were going to the moon and back.
Yeah.
What does it say? It was planted here in 1976.
What's going on with the base of this tree?
Redwoods tend to burrow. I think the ground here used to be a little higher, and over the years, and then they put this pathway in here, and they cut roots. So I think it is building up some kind of resistance to the wood. So that side of the burrow isn't quite as big, but this side is bigger. So I think it has something to do with mechanical damage, soil being eroded away, and the tree trying to, think of a wine glass. You got the wine in the cup, it's pretty heavy, got the skinny stem, which is the trunk, and then you have that flare of the wine glass that keeps it from tipping over. Typically that's how roots go out, especially in our heavy clay, construction, compacted soils. It's hard for them to penetrate and go very deep. And so the roots tend to go, you can see these big surface roots, they tend to go out laterally. And I'm sure just under that turf, there's lots of roots, probably pretty small roots because they're feeder roots feeding off of that turf.